Wait. You've lost how many men in how long? And how many are surrounded right now? Are you sure you're winning? Because that sounds like an awful lot. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. Right. March 6th, 1942. We've seen all sorts of tech developments so far this war, on all sides. New tanks, new subs, new guns, anything to get the advantage over the enemy. This week, something new enters service, but this week, it's new electronics. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. At the end of last week, the Battle of the Java Sea began, and over several days into this week, the Japanese sank pretty much the entire Allied fleet that opposed them. The Japanese were also advancing in the Dutch East Indies and in Burma. The march through Burma continues this week. On the 2nd, the Japanese crossed the Sitang River in force. Allied India commander Archie Wavell meets Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek that day and promises to try and hold Rangoon, the capital. Chiang will get his 5th Army to Taungoo as soon as it can, so Wavell can concentrate force around Rangoon. On the 5th, General Harold Alexander arrives in Rangoon to take charge and orders counterattacks. He led the British 1st Division in France and at Dunkirk in 1940. Alexander is to hold Rangoon, but not allow the destruction of his army. So if he has to, he should just hold North Burma so they can maybe build a road there from India. General Ieda's Japanese troops have now had a week to recover and get their logistics in order for the advance on Rangoon. He actually plans to capture it by marching rather than by fighting. What I mean by that is that his 55th Division will attack through Pegu, and this would occupy British attention, while his 33rd Division would swing around and reach Rangoon from the north. So Alexander arrives in Rangoon the 5th and sends the 48th Indian Brigade, backed by the 7th Armored and 63rd Indian Brigades, to stop the enemy at Pegu. He realizes as the week ends that he's been outflanked and must abandon Rangoon. Not only that, but the Japanese have cut off his route of retreat, although he does not yet know that. Concerning India itself, on February 28th, Indian nationalist leader Subhas Chandra Bose broadcasts on Free India radio from Berlin about India's desire for independence, and thus his readiness to cooperate with Germany. German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels writes in his diary, "In London, there is boundless wrath about the appeal of Bose, whose present abode is fortunately not known." But what about India anyhow? Obviously, with the Japanese in Burma heading for Rangoon, a lot of eyes have to be on the subcontinent. Gerhard Weinberg has a couple of observations about that in A World at Arms. Great book. A rallying of the peoples of India to the Allied side was precluded by the British policy of avoiding or postponing major concessions to Indian nationalist aspirations, especially in the area of defense. It is safe to argue that the key stumbling block was the British Prime Minister. Churchill had originally broken with the Conservative Party over concessions which the party wished to make to Indian self-government. He had resisted all further changes on this issue. But on the other side, a possible rallying of articulate Indian public opinion to the side of the Axis was prevented by the split in the Indian nationalist movement and the ambivalence of Axis policy. See, whatever they felt about Britain, India's Congress Party or its Muslim leaders were not keen on Germany or Japan replacing Britain as rulers. They don't exactly have great reputations. As for the main Axis powers, the Germans, Italians, and Japanese are discussing what sort of policy, if any, they will publicly announce concerning India, and whether to openly side with Bose or to try to work with Gandhi or Nehru, who are the main drivers in the Congress Party. We will see more on this as the spring develops. What's developing right now are a variety of other Japanese attacks. On the 2nd, Japanese troops land on Mindanao, supported by naval bombardment. On the 5th, Japanese troops leave Rabaul, bound for New Guinea. On March 1st, though, the Japanese make their major invasion landings on Java. The main west invasion convoy at Bantam Bay, a smaller one near Sobang, the eastern one on Kragan. These are the forces that fought the battles of the Sound Strait and Java Sea before landing, which I went into detail about last week. The Japanese are now masters of the Java Sea. The main western force is the Japanese 2nd Division, and it sends units to Buitenzorg to cut off any escape route from Batavia, the capital, to Bandung, while the main force makes for Batavia itself. That 1st detachment fights the Battle of Loy Viliang against Australian infantry, backed by British armor and American artillery, the 3rd through the 5th. This is really a holding action by the Allies to give the Dutch time to withdraw, which they do from both Batavia and Buitenzorg from the 4th. Batavia is occupied by the Japanese the 5th and Buitenzorg the 6th as the week ends. The smaller western force captures the Kalajati airfield already the 1st, which compromises the Dutch defenses. The eastern force is to secure the Shepo oil fields and advance to Surabaya, which they do despite stiff resistance. Further to the south, the Japanese launch an air raid on Broome, Australia on the 3rd. This is where many refugees from the Dutch East Indies pass through, and has become an important Allied base over just the past couple of weeks, with the Japanese invading the nearby Indies. The raid is not a bombing raid, but a strafing raid by 9 Zeros against the flying boat base used to ferry troops and refugees from Java. 88 people are listed as the official death toll, and 23, or perhaps more, planes are destroyed, including an American B-17 Flying Fortress and 15 flying boats at anchor. The Allies launch a raid of their own this week on Marcus Island. This is a sequel to the attack on Wake Island and is launched from the American carrier Enterprise, 31 bombers and 6 fighters strong. Several buildings are destroyed and a bunch of fires started, but there are not nearly as many installations on the island as were anticipated. The Pacific is not the only ocean seeing raiding actions this week. Operation Biting is British troops raiding the German radar station at Bruneval and taking away equipment to examine. I mentioned this briefly last week. We cover this on our Instagram day-by-day series, so check it out there. In the Battle of the Atlantic as a whole for the month of February, the Allies lose 154 ships for 679,600 tons. That's a lot more than in January. 54 of those ships are sunk in the Pacific. The Germans and Italians have started a U-boat campaign off the east coast of the US and in the Caribbean, as we've seen. Also, back on February 1st, the Germans use a new cipher they call Triton for radio traffic to the Atlantic U-boats. The British have not cracked this. They have improved their radio direction finding and photo reconnaissance abilities, though, and can still read most of the other German naval codes, so they can at least make educated guesses about operations, but those are still just guesses. Also for the British, though it's in the skies and not at sea, GEE, navigational aid comes into large-scale service this month. Now, during the Battle of Britain in 1940, I talked about the German beam navigational systems used to guide their bombers, especially at night. I will preface the British G system with a quote from the Oxford Companion to World War II. It is easy to make light of the German beam systems and their failure in the face of countermeasures, but it should be remembered that for the first 2.5 years of the war, they were far in advance of anything in service of any other nation. The significance of the German system falls into relief if we consider how badly the RAF Bomber Command performed without such aids. If the accuracy of the German night raids on the UK during the period was mediocre, that of the RAF on Germany was miserable. In fact, the Bunt report from last summer determined from aerial reconnaissance that of the 6,103 sorties Britain sent out in June and July, only 4,065 of them actually attacked, and of those, only 1 out of 3 dropped its bombs within 8 kilometers of the intended target. For the industrial Ruhr, this was about 1 in 10. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill opined, It is an awful thought that perhaps 3/4 of our bombs go astray. If we could make it half and half, we should virtually have doubled our bombing power. That report was a major impetus for work on developing electronic navigation systems, and G is the first to go into service. It uses 3 ground transmitters that send a chain of pulses in a predetermined order. The receivers are aboard the planes, and the navigators measure the pulses' times of arrival, which give position on the map. However, the Germans have their transmitters in occupied France, so the British ones used to attack Germany are far farther from their targets and are thus less accurate, but are still a huge improvement. In other British aviation news this week, on the 6th, the carrier Eagle brings 18 Spitfires and 7 Blenheim bombers to Malta. These are the first Spitfires to be sent for service overseas. In the Mediterranean and North African theater in general, on the 26th and 27th, British Commander Claude Auchinleck receives telegrams from London. One is about their numerical superiority in armor in North Africa and asks Auchinleck's intentions in terms of attacking, and the other says that an advance into Western Cyrenaica is essential for the survival of Malta. Auchinleck replied that with the best will in the world, an offensive before June 1st would incur the risk of defeat in detail and might well leave Egypt wide open to the enemy. I imagine there will be more telegrams to come. Any attack would be against Erwin Rommel, whose recent offensive kicked the Allies out of Western Cyrenaica and further endangered Malta's position. But any British or German attack there is in the future. As for Germany's current campaign, the one in the Soviet Union, German Army Chief of Staff Franz Halder estimates March 1st that total German losses versus the USSR so far are 1.5 million. Fedor von Bock tells Adolf Hitler this day that the Soviets might not only have enough reserves to defend against a German spring offensive, but also to create new armies east of Moscow. Halder disagrees. Germany currently has some 100,000 men surrounded by the Red Army in the Demyansk pocket, and that's on everyone's mind. Joseph Stalin ordered it closed last week, but that's easier said than done. Now Stavka proposes that instead of compressing it, they should split it along its 350-kilometer border and also make a final decisive thrust against Staraya Russa. And that brings me to the end of the week. With Allied capitals Rangoon and Batavia evacuated in the face of advancing Japanese, raids in the Atlantic, the Pacific, and Australia, and new technology for the British. 2 more capitals to fall to the Axis powers. The oil of the East Indies in Japanese hands to power their war machine. The Burma Road, no longer to provide supplies and relief to the Chinese nationalists in their struggle against Japan. March looks dark for the Allied forces indeed. But of course, it's darker for the populations that fall under Axis control. That's not just an opinion or me picking sides. That's something we've seen brutally illustrated week after week after week. And I bet that is going to continue for many weeks to come. If you'd like to learn more about one of the commanders I just mentioned, Claude Auchinleck, you can take a look at the bio special we did about him right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Anna B. Like Anna Be Good, like Johnny Be Good, except without the good. But it's good that people like Anna B support us because it is the Time Ghost Army that is responsible for making all the content that we make. That's what finances all of this. So join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And I will see you next time.